Hi, I'm pleased to be back on chillTV with another edition of PENNER's Politburo. This week, my guest is Laurie Throness, the member of the BC Legislature elected to represent the constituency known as Chilliwack-Kent. Hi, Laurie. Nice to see you again.
It's nice to be here, Barry.
And welcome back to chillTV. I know that a few weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, you were up in Prince George attending a caucus meeting. Those things, or meetings of BC Liberal MLAs, normally take place in Victoria. What brought you to Prince George?
Well, we felt that the government was not paying enough attention to BC's north. As you know, the logging industry is in a shambles in BC's north, and so we like to draw attention to that by the places we go. So we are concerned about the north, and we wanted to be there.
And can you tell us a little bit about what you talked about? I know that what happens in a caucus meeting is supposed to normally stay in a caucus meeting, be confidential, but maybe some broad themes?
Yeah, there are general things that you discuss in every caucus meeting. You'll discuss private members' business. You'll discuss the upcoming session, which is coming up very soon. You discuss election readiness. You discuss policy, party policy, and things like that. So there was a range of issues that were discussed, but of course, I'm not allowed to speak about that.
And just for our viewers' interest, what is private members' business? What does that term mean?
Private members' business is just issues that an individual MLA will have. Something that they're worried about, some issue that's cropped up in their riding, something that they're dissatisfied with. It can be anything.
And so you raise it in front of your group and try and get their support to take forward an issue?
Yeah.
Now the BC Legislature is going back into session in just a few days after a break for Christmas and New Year's. It starts with a speech from the throne, but in my mind the real substantive thing that always happens is the week later with the introduction of a budget for the year. That's a financial document, but it's also very much a political statement by the government of the day. What are you expecting in that upcoming budget and the legislative session itself?
Well, the budget will be on the 18th, and we're expecting a stand-pat budget. You know, the NDP are out of money. We left them with a $2.7 billion surplus, which they quickly spent. They introduced about 19 new and increased taxes. So they've taxed to the max, they've spent to the max. I think they're just trying to balance the budget. So it's going to be a stand-pat budget. That's what we're expecting. Things
will be a bit different in terms of the dynamic at the legislature, I think, for this session. Andrew Weaver, the now former leader of the Green Party, has stepped down from that role. Most British Columbians got to know him as the leader of the Green Party and their spokesperson. But he has quit. He's got some family issues. He's dealing with health issues, I think, with someone in his close family. We all wish him well in that regard. But to me, it does indicate the fact that he actually quit the Green Party caucus, that there's something else afoot, maybe some significant disagreements between him and his two other now previous caucus colleagues.
Yes.
So I think this will introduce maybe a bit of more unpredictability into the legislative scene. What are your thoughts?
In fact, we hear that Mr. Weaver may actually resign his seat after the session this summer. And if so, then that really makes things unstable, because we used to own his riding. Oak Bay Gordon Head was held by a BC Liberal for many years.
Ida Chong, a former colleague of mine.
That's exactly right. And so if we were to win the by-election, then there would be a tie in the House, 43 seats to 43 seats. And that makes the House pretty well unmanageable. So it could be, in my opinion, that the government would rather go to an election than risk the House becoming a hung parliament. And so we could be looking at an election this fall if Mr. Weaver resigns this summer. That's my feeling.
And the NDP decides not to risk a by-election.
Exactly.
Go for a general instead.
Exactly.
Interesting. Turning our gaze a little closer to home and away from Vancouver Island, there have been some treaty development talks here that's been ongoing for many years, and it's once in a while it's popped up as a news story, but then it fades away.
Yes.
So I don't think most residents really know what's afoot, at least not to much detail. Can you tell us a bit more about what the tribal leadership group known as the SXTA and the BC government is up to? The
SXTA is a group of 6 Stolo First Nations, and they're negotiating a treaty with the provincial and federal governments. And I support the treaty process. This has been going on since 1995. They've gotten to stage 5 of 6 stages, and the land and cash offer has been made. So a land offer is about 10,000 hectares, most of it in the Chilliwack River Valley, and $150 million. That has yet to be ratified by all governments, and so we're not sure what that will look like yet, but I want my constituents to know that this is happening, because many of them live in the Chilliwack River Valley and are concerned about access and about just the impacts of this treaty. And it'll be finalized probably in 3 or 4 years. But right now, nothing is written in stone, so I'm encouraging my constituents to call me if they have an issue that we can help them work through.
Typically with treaty agreements, the federal government brings cash and the province is expected to put land on the table.
That's right.
Is there any discussion about what's happening with the provincial parks in that area? Are they on the table?
I don't think the provincial parks are on the table, no. I've looked at the maps, and they fall short of the parks.
Of Chilliwack Lake Provincial
That's
Park?
right, yeah.
You've introduced not one, but 2 private members' bills in recent months. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. I introduced one on seat belts for school buses. I think it's time now that, you know, when 50 children are riding together, that's a real risk of a rollover. There was one the other day I saw on the news. It's time that we have seat belts in school buses. And that was really received very well. And the other one was about trespassing on farmers' land. There are activist groups which oppose any kind of animal husbandry, and of course we know we have a huge farming community here that depends on animal husbandry, and so I've introduced an amendment to the Trespassing Act to provide penalties to deter people from doing that.
And what's the reaction been to that?
Well, the reaction has been very good on the ground. As we know, we have, you know, we're the second biggest in the province in terms of farm gate receipts here in Chilliwack. And so this industry is very important. And also, you know, as a philosophy, I think my constituents appreciate a good steak, and they appreciate having chicken with their lunch, and they're going to keep on doing that, and so we want to preserve that.
Any hint from the government whether they're likely to pick up on the ideas in these 2 private members' bills? They seldom get called for debate, because it's up to the government of the day to decide what legislation gets debated. But they can sometimes turn around and adopt the ideas in their own bills and try and take credit for it.
Well, we got some informal feeling that they're positive toward both those things. Probably in the trespassing issue, they will take more concerted action. Instead of passing more legislation, it will be more police action if this should happen again. And on the school bus thing, I think it's something that's going to happen. I think it's kind of inevitable anyway. And so I think they'll get on board in time.
It's always one of those things where it's surprising it hasn't happened already.
That's true.
In many ways. Yeah. We discussed earlier the possibility of an election this year, and I know, reading the news, that your party's been busy nominating candidates already. There's been some in the Fraser Valley and elsewhere, mostly in unheld ridings where the party doesn't have that seat at the moment, but closer to home where the seats are held by BC Liberals, both by you and John Martin. Any word on when a nomination race will be called here?
Well, that's an interesting question. We have 87 seats to nominate, as you know, and about 45 of them are unheld seats, and so we start with those. Those people need to be nominated to have their name as long as they can before the election period out in public. And so we're starting with those. There's 4 already that are in train. And probably other nominations will begin about a year before the election that we expect. And so we don't expect any election nominations in either riding in Chilliwack right away. Okay.
Well, it was right here on PENNER's Politburo, I think in November, that we learned that your legislative colleague, John Martin, who's the MLA for the other Chilliwack riding or constituency, is facing a potential challenge from a would-be BC Liberal candidate in the name of Diane Jansen, who's familiar to many people in Chilliwack as having been formerly on City Council and before that on school board. Of course, we don't know if the BC Liberal Party will allow challengers to step forward and take on an incumbent MLA. Is there any rumblings of any other challengers in this area stepping forward, maybe for yourself?
I don't know of any other challenges. I haven't heard about it. And we'll have to see what happens in the Chilliwack riding. I mean, the leader in the party will have to work that out. I myself sort of want to be independent from that whole process there. And it's simply my pledge to work enthusiastically with my colleague in the Chilliwack riding.
But you haven't heard any rumblings of other contestants?
I haven't heard of any other contestants or developments there. We'll have to see what happens.
Well, there have been some other developments recently. We've had a big announcement just a short while ago from the provincial government announcing major changes to ICBC, something I was once the chairman of before being removed by the current government.
I should ask your opinion about that.
I have plenty about being removed, certainly. There have been repeated attempts by the current government and claims that there measures would stem the increasing rates. It hasn't quite happened. What's your take on what we've heard about an introduction of no-fault insurance? Is this something the NDP said they would do before the election?
This is something they said they wouldn't do before the election, and now they're turning tail. You know, so far in the past 2 years, they've not succeeded in bringing down rates. And so we're really skeptical about their possibility of doing that in the future. I mean, it is forecast that rates have gone up by 18% since they were elected, and they're forecast to go up another 24%. Now they're saying they're going to come down by 20%. I think that might be a wash. So I'm skeptical of everything that the NDP is suggesting about ICBC. And a policy of our party is to bring competition to bear on auto insurance in BC, and I think that's still our policy. I think we're going to stick with that. And I can tell you that my constituents are very unhappy with ICBC and the rates that they have to pay. I know I'm paying more than I ever have in my life for insurance. I'm unhappy about that. And so we think that the people of BC are going to be on board for change.
Well, I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that when the legislature goes back into session. You mentioned the budget and them being out of money. I suspect this move is also somewhat related to a budget measure to help them get back in the black. But we'll see what unfolds this spring. I think it'll be a very interesting session.
It will.
Possibly leading up to a fall election.
It will.
Thank you, MLA Throness, for joining me on PENNER's Politburo, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We'll see you soon.